Life and death walk hand in hand, and humans have performed ritualized burials of deceased loved ones since before the beginnings of recorded history. Burial traditions and funerary rites vary dramatically across the globe, and many historians theorize that the practice evolved from concern and curiosity about what happens to people after death. Burial sites have often given us a fascinating insight into the customs and beliefs of an ancient peoples, and it is telling that tombs have outlasted the cultures that built them as a permanent reminder of the transience of life. In this video, we will look at 5 unique and ancient burial sites that give us a brief glimpse into the lives of our ancestors. Number 1. Chambered cairns. Chambered cairns are found in clusters across the UK, but mainly in Northern Ireland, Western and Northern Scotland, and the southwest of England. They fascinated historians during the 19th century, who thought of the monuments as tombs. However, later studies have concluded that although they did function in funerary rites, they were not used for the permanent interment of bodies, as the majority of the cairns did not contain human remains. The skeletal remains found in the cairns come from men, women, and children of many ages. Some remains are found as articulated skeletons, some were neatly organized deposits, and others were jumbled piles of bones. At one cairn in Norse, the skulls of the deceased were placed around the rear of the chamber, with the rest of the bones in the middle, whereas at Midhow, 9 complete skeletons were found in crouched or sitting positions. Historians believe that these cairns were not just for the dead. It is likely that the living would regularly enter the chambers, and those without human remains were built for ancestor worship and linked to rituals surrounding death. However, whether they were intended to be the final resting place for deceased relatives is still up for debate. While the general layout of the cairns is similar across the UK, it seems that each was used differently and may have served different purposes depending on the community. The cairns were constructed from around 3500 BCE onward, during the Neolithic period, and their similarity to the Neolithic dwellings at the time led historians to the idea that they were houses for the dead. Another interesting detail is that the cairns didn't just slowly fade out of use. It appears that once the cairn had fulfilled its purpose, they were sealed and sometimes deliberately filled with rubble. Number 2. The Plain of Jars. In the 1930s, French archaeologist Madeleine Colani began researching ancient tubular-shaped megalithic monuments known as jars, located throughout the Chiang Plain in central Laos. The jars were found with cremated human remains alongside burned bones and ash that were found in a nearby cave. Since then, over 2,000 of these jars have been identified in the region. Most of the structures are made of sedimentary rock and range from 3 to 10 feet high. Local legend states that the jars were created by an ancient king of giants called Kun Cheong, who made them to brew celebratory Lao Lao rice wine. There were reports that the jars were once filled with artifacts such as axes, jewelry, and carnelian beads, but the site had been looted long before Kalani began recording her findings. Kalani's findings led her to believe that the jars had been created for funerary rites for chieftains between 500 BCE and 800 CE. The jars, weighing up to 14 tons each, are found next to large stone discs, thought to be lids to the jars, as well as grave markers, secondary burials, and manufacturing sites. It is generally agreed that they were made by an Iron Age civilization. Most historians believe that the jars were used for funerary practices and that a possible function was to allow bodies to decompose, after which the bones were buried. However, their use is still debated, and as similar clusters of jars have been found in a linear path from Laos to northern India, some believe that the jars were linked to trade routes and may have been used to collect rainwater during the monsoon season that could be used by people traveling during the dry season. Studying these jars is not an easy business, and the plateau where they are found is considered to be one of the most dangerous archaeological sites in the world due to the large amounts of unexploded bombs that still litter the area. These bombs are remnants of the secret war of the 1960s and 1970s, in which the United States dumped around 4 billion pounds of bombs on Laos, many of which remained undetonated and hidden by vegetation. Number 3. Sutton Hoo. In 1937, widow Edith Petty met historian Vincent Redstone. The two began discussing the burial mounds that were on Petty's estate. Inspired by excavations Petty had seen while touring the world in her youth, she discussed the possibility of conducting an archaeological dig. In the spring of 1938, the dig began, and amateur archaeologist Basil Brown joined Petty along with Peggy Piggott, Guy Maynard, and James Reed Moore. Brown was a local Suffolk man who had only received a limited formal education but had taught himself astronomy, geography, geology, and several languages. During the dig, Brown recognized several pieces of iron as being ship rivets. The burial mounds turned out to be the richest intact medieval grave in Europe, consisting of an 88.6-foot-long ship with a burial chamber. It was determined that whoever was buried at the site had died in the early 7th century when Britain was still divided into roughly 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Sutton Hoo was located in the Kingdom of East Anglia, the eastern settlement of the Angles. The vessel was likely dragged uphill from the River Deben, which would have required a great deal of effort and manpower. Ship burials were very rare in Anglo-Saxon England, suggesting that this was the final resting place of a powerful and influential Anglo king. However, the identity of this clearly important person remains a mystery to this day. Despite the grave itself being exceptionally well preserved, any human remains that were once entombed there have long since decayed, leaving a human-shaped gap among the burial goods and a king-shaped mystery in the annals of history. When the grave was first unearthed, there was a speculation that it never encased a body at all and was an empty monument with the remains buried elsewhere. However, recent soil analysis confirmed that there were indeed human remains at the site. Despite not knowing their name, we do know a lot of interesting information about the person who was buried with such ceremony at Sutton Hoo. For example, it is believed that the warrior king was left-handed, as the sword found was on the right side of the body, with patterns of wear also indicating that it was used in the left hand. It is postulated that being left-handed may have meant that, in life, the person was a renowned warrior, as fighting left-handed would have given them an advantage, since most fighters would have been expecting a right-handed attack. One of the most distinctive artifacts found at the site was the Sutton Hoo helmet. Wrapped in a cloth and laid reverently next to the person's head, the extraordinary helmet is covered in images of warriors and fierce creatures. The mask of the helmet depicts a dragon, with its tail forming a mustache and the wings making eyebrows. The helmet would have been elaborately and dazzlingly decorated, as evidenced by the garnets lining the eyebrows. One of the eyebrows is also backed with gold foil reflectors, suggesting a reference to Woden, the one-eyed god. Number 4. Small River Cemetery. In 1934, a Swedish archaeologist named Folke Bergman discovered a 4,000-year-old cemetery in Xinjiang, China. The Small River Cemetery faded once more into obscurity until a Chinese expedition rediscovered it and began excavating the site from 2003 to 2005. Although located in a desert, the naturally mummified remains of around 200 people were found under boat structures along the dried-up river of Xiaohe, Small River. The most remarkable thing about these extraordinarily well-preserved bodies is that they have distinctly European features, with brown or blonde hair and long noses. The grave markers are poles, each around 13 feet tall. Many were painted black and red, and some had flat blades like the oars from a galley ship. At the foot of each pole lay upturned boats covered in cowhide, which concealed the mummified remains. The bodies were dressed in leather boots, large felt caps with feathers tucked into the brim, akin to traditional Bavarian mountain hats, or woolen caps with tassels. The men wore woolen loincloths, while the women wore skirts made of string strands similar to the one found on the egg-fed girl in Denmark. It has been speculated that these skirts were linked to ritual dances during the Bronze Age. The way the bodies were dressed, coupled with life-size wooden phalluses that were found in the graves of the women, caused many historians to believe that the wooden poles marking the graves of the women were also phallic symbols, and that the poles with blade-like tops that marked the men's graves may have been yonic imagery. The sexual symbolism is thought to reflect the importance of fertility to the community. Nothing is known about these people, and their origin and identity are still a mystery. It is thought that, as there are no known settlements near the cemetery and as no evidence of woodworking tools has been found on the site, the people probably lived elsewhere and crafted the poles and other grave goods off-site. The bodies, boats, poles, and other artifacts would have been sailed to the site for burial. Analysis of the mummy's DNA suggests that the people were of mixed European and Siberian ancestry, and most likely came from outside China. However, the striking similarities between European Bronze Age culture and these burials make the Small River Cemetery both unique and fascinating. Number 5. KSA Cave. Discovered in the 1930s and excavated between 1933 and 1935 by Moshe Stakalis and René Neuville, the KSA Cave in Israel is the oldest example of intentional human burial. The remains found in the cave have been dated to the Middle Paleolithic period, around 90,000 years ago. Not only is the site amazing for its early burials, but it also showed signs of modern human behavior, such as the use of hearths and stone tools. The cave contains bone fragments of around 27 people, including 8 partial skeletons and at least 2 that are completely intact. Most of the human remains appear to have been buried deliberately, which is a distinct indicator of modern human behavior. Other anomalies include the use of ochre for body painting and the presence of marine shells for decorative purposes, which had, until recently, been thought to have started much later. Amongst the remains, there is also evidence that a child with severe head trauma had been cared for well enough for the wound to heal and had died 8 years after the brain injury. The burials at KSA Cave are both important and unique due to the evidence of modern human behaviors and the Mousterian tools that were found. These tools are more commonly linked to European Neanderthals. The cave also contained the only known double burial from the Middle Paleolithic era, consisting of an adult and a child. It is thought that the adult was around 21 years of age, the child was roughly 6, and that the bodies are those of a mother and daughter. However, as the bones are fossilized, no DNA remains to confirm this theory. Another entombment contained clear evidence of a burial offering, with the remains of a 12 to 13-year-old buried with a piece of deer, including a portion of its skull placed on the adolescent's body with their right hand touching the forehead of the deer. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about history, check out our Captivating History book series, which is available as ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.